Hey everyone, I'm Matt Dolan with Dolan Divorce Lawyers in Connecticut, and today what I'm going to talk about are premarital agreements in Connecticut, also more commonly known as prenups. Now, as many of you may know, a prenup is a contract that is entered into by two individuals who anticipate that they will be getting married. And the contract addresses what happens between the parties financially in the event of death or divorce. Now, as I mentioned, it's death or divorce. People often think that a prenup only addresses what happens if the parties are to get divorced, but it also covers what happens financially if one of the parties dies, while they're still married. Now, if you don't have a prenup, the financial terms of your divorce, they're subject to Connecticut law. And I've done a bunch of videos that cover, alimony, division of assets, etc., under Connecticut law. But at its core, it's essentially what a judge deems to be fair and equitable. That is what happens with regard to division of assets, debts, alimony, etc. And you and your spouse, you may have your own ideas as to what you think is fair and equitable if you and your spouse, if the two of you are to get divorced. So you may not want to put it in the hands of a judge. Obviously what a judge decides can vary. Judges are human beings, so you may not want to put it into the hands of some third party. You may want to define prior to your marriage what happens financially in the event of divorce. A prenup can also be beneficial in, not only do you define the terms, but it can just make it less messy if you've already divorce can be very messy. If you have already defined what happens financially in the event of divorce, it can really streamline the process. And, if there unfortunately is a divorce, it can become much simpler if you have a prenup. Now, prenups are governed by the Connecticut Premarital Agreement Act, which requires that certain, terms be fulfilled in order for a prenup to be valid. First off, both parties must enter into the premarital agreement voluntarily. There can't be any coercion or undue pressure. Obviously, you can't force the other side to, enter into a prenup, but, it can also be considered coercive if you bring up and have the other party sign the prenup at the last minute. You bring it up a week before the marriage. Well, if you've got this big $100,000 wedding or $50,000 wedding or whatever it is, and you've got 200 relatives and friends coming from out of town, and somebody brings up a prenup for the first time, well, that can be somewhat coercive, and it puts the other person in a tight spot, and it's like, all right, I feel like I have to sign this thing because I don't want to cancel my wedding that 200 people are coming to. So if you are looking to get a prenup, you want to bring it up to your spouse and start to address it months, if not a year in advance. The sooner the better, because if you wait if it gets signed, brought up and signed too late, particularly if it's brought up at the last minute, sometimes it's signed at the last minute, and that's more okay. But you want to bring it up well in advance in order to reduce the risk of the prenup being invalidated as, coercive or undue pressure if you do ultimately get divorced. So it must be entered into voluntarily. There must be full financial disclosures. So in order to enter into a prenup, both parties have to fully disclose all of their assets, their liabilities or debts, and their income. That will be put on a schedule for each, individual, and that will be included in the prenup document because, you want to know, the idea is you want to know what you're getting into financially before you enter into any contract. It's only fair if you have a full understanding of your, future spouse's income, assets and liabilities. The agreement, it must be in writing and signed by both parties. That's somewhat common sense. Both parties must have had the opportunity to consult with independent attorneys. So that kind of also goes into the not doing it at the last minute. You want to make sure that the other side has an opportunity to speak with an attorney. And generally speaking, you want both parties to have an attorney just to reduce the likelihood of the prenup being invalidated. And then finally, the agreement must not be unconscionable or grossly unfair, either at the time of the signing or when the agreement is enforced. So it can't be so one-sided that the court, ultimately finds that it would be an injustice to follow the terms of this prenup. An example might be, parties don't have much money and they get married, and the terms of the prenup says that both parties keep whatever money they bring into the marriage, and they keep any money that they earn on their own and keep in a separate account. That could be a term in a prenup. Well, let's say they've been married for 30 years and the husband has a high-paying job where he earns, $50 million over the course of those 30 years, and he keeps that all in a separate account. That, the terms of the prenup could dictate that the husband keeps anything that he earned and kept in a separate account. A court would not likely enforce a prenup that leaves the wife with nothing and the husband with $50 million, that he has kept, or $30 million or whatever that he has kept in a separate account. So that's a high burden for a agreement to be found unconscionable. But if the agreement is so grossly unfair at the time that it is signed or at the time of the divorce, it can be invalidated, and the court, isn't necessarily bound by the terms of the prenup. And that's something that you will want to consult with an attorney about. Generally speaking, an agreement is only found to be unconscionable if there's a lot of money at stake. So if there's a lot of money at stake and you think it's unconscionable, you want to talk to an attorney to figure out whether there's a way to invalidate that prenup. So those are, the checklist of things that need to be, completed in order for a prenup to be valid. And as far as what the prenup can cover, it covers division of assets and liabilities, including businesses. So it may say that what both parties brought into the marriage by way of assets and liabilities, those are kept separate, and anything that's accumulated during the marriage is divided, per 50-50, or how the court deems fair and equitable. Some parties do it that way. Other prenups say that everything that's brought into the marriage is, each party keeps their own assets if they brought them into the marriage, but also any assets they accumulate after the marriage are also separate. People may do that, and same goes for liabilities. A prenup can deal with what happens to a business. Maybe if somebody had a business coming into a marriage, that business remains their own business after the marriage. It also can deal with alimony. There's often an alimony waiver in a prenup that says that neither party can receive alimony from the other, or not. Oftentimes prenups do not have an alimony waiver. The intent of the parties is more to deal with assets that they brought into the marriage and wanting to protect those assets, and they don't go so far as to include alimony. What cannot be included in a prenup are terms relating to child custody and child support. So it's, the government found that it's against public policy. You can't, you have no idea what your kids are going to be like, what their custody needs are going to be. It's not, the ultimate standard with regard to child custody is the courts want to do what is in the best interest of the child, and you can't contract for that in advance. You really need to take a snapshot of what's going on now in order to determine what is in the best interest of the child from a custody perspective. And same with child support. You cannot include provisions regarding child support in a prenup. There's an obligation to support children, and you cannot waive, the government has found that you cannot waive your obligation to support a child in a way that is fair through a prenup. It's just not allowed. So those are the basics on prenups here in Connecticut. As usual, if you have any other questions, feel free to contact our office. And if you are looking for representation in drafting or reviewing a premarital agreement or prenup, we would invite you to contact our office as well.